Hello and welcome to the Alaska Housing and Homelessness Gubernatorial Town Hall. I'm your moderator, Ann Hillman. All of the candidates for governor were invited to participate live or via Zoom. Joining me here in Anchorage are gubernatorial candidates Les Guerra and Bill Walker. Thank you both very much for being here.
Thank you, Ann.
Thanks, Ann.
Today's event is hosted by the Alaska Coalition on Housing and Homelessness and the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness. The questions today come from input from community members across the state. We'll be discussing issues that are important to people across Alaska, not just in urban areas. Over the next hour, we'll have a semi-structured conversation about housing and homelessness in Alaska. For each question, the candidates will have 3 minutes to present their positions and plans, and then we'll discuss the issues together. It's an opportunity for candidates to ask questions of each other and to build upon each other's answers. It's a time where I can ask follow-up questions too. We're building flexibility into the format to allow time for productive and informative conversations that allow candidates an opportunity to go deeper and to allow the audience to gain a more thorough understanding of the issues. And also in the spirit of ranked choice voting, we're aiming to promote civility. We're starting with a question that the two coalitions have sent to every legislative candidate here in the state. If elected, how would you improve or expand access to housing in Alaska? And Les, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of these sort of subsurface crises that's building in Alaska. You don't see the lead politicians talk about it. I haven't, frankly, heard the governor talk about it once in 4 years. And so if I get elected, which I hope I do, or if Bill gets elected, we're going to be dealing with a crisis that nobody's addressed. And in the private sector, people are addressing it. Nonprofits are addressing it. But we're going to have to put together a lot of working groups, right? I mean, there are things that we have in place. HUD helps us provide for mixed income housing. Mixed income housing is a great thing. We don't have enough of it. We now have employers and school districts building housing because teachers can't afford to live in Nome. They can't afford to live in Seward. They can't afford to live in many communities around the state. So school districts are getting in the housing business, and hospitals are getting in the housing business because their employees can't afford to live in communities like Sitka and Ketchikan and Bethel. And I think one of the things we have to do is put together all of these people working on this crisis, private developers and the employers like hospitals and school districts, and the people who are able to get HUD mixed income housing funding, and tribal entities that have their own pots of money. I mean, I was talking to Richard Peterson, president of Tlingit Haida Central Council in Juneau, and he said we have to get everybody together, so we're not doing this in silos. And so I think that's part of it, but you cannot solve a housing crisis for free. You cannot solve most of the state's problems for free. I'll talk a little bit about what I think we need to do to raise money in the state. It's ending these oil company subsidies that are costing us over $1 billion a year, because the housing crisis is not going to be solved for free. There's going to have to be a state role. We have AHFC, Alaska Housing Finance Corporation. It does good things, but it's not building very much housing, and it gives the state a $50 million dividend every year. I think we're going to have to start using some of that dividend to partner with private entities and nonprofits and tribal entities and the Cook Inlet Housings of the world to see if we can leverage a plan together. And I think we're going to have to start sacrificing some of that dividend to get people housing so that a family can start a home, so somebody can afford an apartment. Because right now it's a crisis. It's a crisis in this state. It's a crisis in Nome. In Nome, they need 50 units for their teachers, and right now they have 14 units, and they had a plan to get to the 50, but then housing prices doubled, like construction supply prices doubled during COVID. And so they don't know how they're going to move forward. But it's a different story in every community, and it's a crisis. There are some nice models. Bill talks about a really nice model in Sitka. There's still a housing crisis in Sitka. It's a nice model. Bill will probably talk about it, the Sitka Trust. It's really innovative, and I'll let Bill talk about it. But there's still a crisis in Sitka, and there's a crisis in every community.
Thank you.
Great question. We've been traveling so much together, we can tell each other our respective stories.
You seem to be predicting.
My background, I'm a carpenter. I'm a journeyman carpenter, and we moved to Valdez from Fairbanks. When they came from Valdez to Fairbanks, the Chamber of Commerce president said, "We don't have a home builder in Valdez. We can't grow our community without a home builder. Would you move to Valdez to build houses?" So that was in roughly 1960, and so we moved from Fairbanks to Valdez and started building houses in the old town. Along came the earthquake, and we became house movers. And so I've been involved in house building pretty much all of my life. You know, I'm a big believer that sometimes the local government can figure it out better than the state. They're a little more efficient, they're a little more focused. Sometimes those closer to the problem are closer to the solution. So this isn't something new. This has been going on for quite some time as far as the issue of affordable housing. So, you know, when I looked into it a bit, you know, there's 47 states have a state land trust, except for 3, and we're one of those 3. We need to have a state land trust. I went to Sitka and met with Min McConnell, who's the former mayor and now is in charge of the Sitka Land Trust, which has been in existence for a long time. They received some land from the city as a grant. Had some environmental issues to resolve. They resolved that. The Rasmussen Foundation helped them put in the utilities for the houses. So they're building 14 houses. That when you buy the house, you're buying just the house. You're leasing the land on a long-term lease, kind of like you do in Hawaii. A lot of property is on leasehold, and the utilities are not paying for that because that was a grant that did that. So you're just paying for the house. So the house is roughly a 3-bedroom, 1.5-bath home for $266,000. Now, the part I really get excited about is that when they sell, whoever buys the home, they can live there forever if they choose. But if they sell it, when they sell it, they can only recapture 25% of the increased value. So it always stays as an affordable home. It's not like a one-off. So those 14 homes, they have about 5 or 6 of them done now. Those 14 homes will always be available on an affordable home housing concept. And so so under that concept, a person making $35 an hour can afford that home. Now they have a 1-bedroom, 1-bath, a home, which a person making $20 an hour can afford the mortgage for that home. And I was standing next to, you know, one of the officers of First Bank in Sitka, who said, and it's conventional financing. So I have always kind of looked at the model. How do you build it? You know, save money on the building concept and this and other thing. And they have really figured it out. And so I do talk about that a lot, just because I'm excited about what I saw, and others are now. Where was I recently? Could have been Ketchikan. It is Ketchikan. They're looking at doing exactly. They're hiring the same person that Sitka had to put together the Ketchikan Land Trust and do the same thing. So it's a great model.
Okay, I'm not going to deny that you say $30 an hour and they can afford this house.
35 an hour.
35 an hour. That's a lot of money an hour, and a lot of people don't make that much an hour. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I guess you're describing a project that sounds amazing, but also is still really pretty far out of reach for a lot of families.
It is, but what they're trying to do is they're trying to fill it with there's a shortage of teachers, mm-hmm. and the teachers they couldn't fill the positions of teachers. So how are we going to find housing for our teachers? How are we going to find, you know? So they're trying to feed that into the education. So they're not dedicated to teachers, but they are dedicated to. And that's a good fit for the educators, no question about that, or the young fishermen that are looking at having a home to sort of building in equity or some, not the full amount of equity, but a little bit. So it fills a niche that they need badly. It doesn't address the homelessness issue, and I don't mean to say that it does, but it does fill a need for housing in a community.
Okay, which actually brings us straight into the first conversation that I'd love to jump into, which is, what do you see as the state government's role in addressing the statewide affordable housing shortage? And Bill, if you'd like to go first.
You know, I think the state does have a role, other than, I mean, typically in the past, it's been just sort of setting a check and saying, you folks figure it out, and sometimes that's been successful, not always. You know, the state has a lot of land, obviously, and certainly the Mental Health Land Trust has a lot of land. And sometimes what's needed for the housing is land. And so sometimes the local government does not have the land available, and the state does. There can be a swap of land, an exchange of land in some way. But I think that, you know, the land is absolutely critical, and the state has a role in that. Secondly, I think that there's, as far as helping with the cost of utilities in the subdivision, sometimes that can be a significant piece of the puzzle as far as, getting the utilities, getting the streets, and you want them, obviously they have to be, built to code and those kinds of things. There's another concept where I think the state can help also is, some of our timber, we bring a lot of our timber from a long ways away. And it's hard to find a tuba for a while, less than 10 or 15, $20. And here we have all this timber available. There is a program available through the state, through the federal government, allows basically it's like a subsistence harvest in some respects of timber. So I would love to see us be able to use some of our in-state timber with in-state labor to, we don't have one sawmill in Alaska on Prince of Wales, Kurt Dahlstrom sawmill. To be able to use some of our own resources, and that state has a role in that as far as there's a certain gradation. You have to grade the timber, you have to have certain specifications. But I don't think that bringing it up 4,000 or 5,000 miles on a barge versus bringing it from within Alaska is always the answer. So I think there's a number of the things the state can do, not just in providing funds, but also access to more affordable materials, and also on heat efficiency. There's some tremendous cold climate housing research out of the University of Alaska. Is I call it my personal Disneyland, because I hardly ever go to Fairbanks without going through that facility, because the cheapest energy is energy you don't use. And so it's bringing that down, the cost of heating the home as far as affordable housing as well. So making it, there are 6-star rated homes, and so that's very important as well. So I think it's a combination. University of Alaska, I think the legislature has a role as far as some funding mechanisms, and I think the executive branch has some opportunities, and certainly within DNR there's some opportunities of access to local timber.
Right. Les?
Yeah, I forgot what the question was, but
I can repeat it for
yeah,
you.
but I want to follow up on something Bill said. So it is the cheapest energy is the energy you don't use. But I and Representative Bill Thomas from Haines wrote the state's energy efficiency standards that require all state buildings, all university buildings, all court buildings, and all school buildings to be built to energy efficiency standards, and that's making its way into home building too. It's not just the cheapest energy is the energy you don't use, but the cleanest energy is the energy you don't use. And for the world that we're leaving for the next generation, climate change matters, and I think we've got to find a way to use cleaner energy, and not using energy is the way to do it. I just got back from Juneau in a subdivision where somebody is helping me in the campaign, and they added to the subdivision, every house in that subdivision is heated by a heat pump, which for people who don't know, it's zero carbon energy. You take the heat from 35-degree weather outside and make it 33-degree weather, and you grab the heat inside your house and you heat your house. I can't explain it better than that. But so that's good. So let's go back to your question and remind me what the question was. But those things are important.
So the question specifically is, what do you see the state government's role in addressing the statewide affordable housing shortage?
Well, you're going to hear it eventually from Bill and I. I wish the governor were here. Right? He's missed 12 out of 13 forums at this point, and I frankly, the reason I want him here is this is a complex subject. Bill or I are going to inherit what is a crisis. So this is not just a small problem. In Nome and in Kodiak and in Ketchikan and in Sitka and in Seward, you can't attract teachers and police because they can't afford a house. And so when you don't have a teacher in the school, it's not just that the teacher's underpaid and doesn't get the benefits they deserve. They can't afford a house. And so there has to be a state role, and it's now crisis level. And I don't hear any leaders talking about it.
So if you were the leader, what would you be doing?
I think the president of Tlingit-Heideck Council was very right. We have to get together every entity that's involved in the housing crisis in a solution. And it's going to be the state, and it's going to be tribal entities, and it's going to be those who can access HUD funds. HUD has a very good program that helps you build mixed income housing. Mixed income housing is way better than low income housing. You put people of different backgrounds together, and it works much better for all the families. I believe in mixed income housing. But I think we have to put all these entities together, and the businesses and the school districts that are now building housing for their teachers, and try and come up with a holistic approach to how we address the housing crisis. Instead of doing it in inefficient silos, it'll be cheaper, it'll be more effective, I think. I think he has a really good idea as you put everybody together and you try and figure out how to do this together.
So would
it's
you
going to be
convene,
expensive.
like, a task force of some sort?
I hate the idea of task forces because in the legislative world, a task force means a group of people you put together whose recommendations you never take. But yeah, you have to put together people to try and figure out what the best plan is. Cook Inlet Housing Authority does amazing work at building mixed income housing. I think they access some of the HUD funds. I'm a big fan of mixed income housing, but I think we have to put together all the entities that are trying to build housing to try and figure out if there's a way we can do some of it together. But the state is going to have to chip in some. I mean, you can say it's going to be free, but it's not going to be free. And I think we do have to say, look, AHFC pays us about a $40 million dividend every year. Maybe it's time we don't take all of that dividend back and we start putting it into AHFC's role in helping to construct housing with these other private and nonprofit and public entities.
So you keep talking about bringing all these partners together. What would you, I mean, other than convening people to make sure that people aren't working in silos, is there anything in specific you would do to, like, it's great to bring people together, but how do you go from conversation to action?
Sure. I mean, let's say you're in Sitka and the healthcare, the hospital there, they've got to build housing. And then people are talking about teacher housing, and then you can talk about mixed income housing. And if everybody's doing it on their own, maybe they don't realize that there's one solution and they don't all three of them don't have to do it. And maybe one of them can leverage federal funding that another one can't. So you should find those things out. But the last thing you should do is have 5 different entities building housing when you could have coordinated it first. Right, so that's what I mean, and that's I think what Richard Peterson means. But also there may be synergies in federal funding and state funding and even housing trust models like they're doing in Sitka, and you might be able to do things together more efficiently and more comprehensively. So everything isn't a silo solution. I mean, you don't really want. In Nome, they told me, look, we do want to build teacher housing, but then we build teacher housing and teachers don't live with other community members and they don't feel integrated with the community. So maybe that's not the best solution, right? So maybe the best solution is to work with a bunch of entities and build the teacher housing inside the community instead of 13 miles out or 5 miles out. It's not 13 miles out, but Nome Belts High School is on the edge of town, and that's where the teacher housing is right now.
Bill, would you like to jump in, or?
Yeah, I think, we put together a housing summit in 2015, and because of the housing issue, and we brought together all the different agencies, and just like as President Peterson talked about, and tribal organization as well, very critical, to lay on the table what everybody could bring into this. We had a housing specialist, Elizabeth Schultz was our specialist on that, and she focused on that aggressively. We've found ourselves shortly thereafter in a $4 billion hole in our budget, and so a lot of things a lot of the aspirations became more challenging because we were such upside down on because the oil prices plummeted and whatnot. So we had to fix that problem as well. So I agree. I certainly agree with Les about. I think task force has sort of gotten if you don't want, it's sort of the adage sometimes is if you don't want to make a decision, create a task force and say you've done something. And really it's kind of like when we did the climate change action leadership team. I told them I did not want to study. I wanted results, and they did. They gave me 43 pages of specific items that we can do in Alaska on climate change. So I'm a believer. I'm a builder. And so I believe in a plan. And so what the goal was to have the housing coalition group come up with a plan of, find out, where do we plant the flag and how do we get there and who can add something to that. And so that was the goal. And it was I tend to plant the flag maybe higher than I should sometimes, but I'd rather do that than not. And so we didn't get the results we did because there's a lot of distraction as a result of the huge financial crisis we found ourselves in. But I would do the same again to reassemble a housing summit and bring them. But I think what's different now, I think for a long time it's been a hesitancy for some reason to not sort of go after federal money. And especially with the tribal relationships and the Governor's Tribal Advisory Council I put together, working collaboratively is absolutely the best way to do that. But looking at federal opportunities that we have, we kind of got, I think, as a state, without being critical, there was always plenty of money, so people didn't go looking for money on the federal side. There's some tremendous programs on housing on the federal side that we need to, some is going to be in the infrastructure bill, some is going to be the Build Back Better, some's going to be, that will help, significantly help, can help Alaskans in that process. So I think the goal is, and one of the things I did, and anytime you cut, like I had to cut as far as department budgets. I mean, I cut Department of Labor by 38%. Commissioner Dragas, now my running mate, they went to Washington D.C. and brought home grants. It was the first time we brought grants back in that department forever. So there's programs out there. We just have to be. I think we have to be a little more aggressive and a little bit hungrier in going after the federal funds.
Okay. So I hear kind of running themes of convening people, seeking out other funding. Is there anything in specific that, Les, you felt like you did when you were in the legislature to try to solve the affordable housing crisis?
It didn't change the world, but so just like I said, I believe in mixed income housing. I think you put people of various backgrounds together, and people live a happier life than if you put only people who have no money together in lower quality housing. That's been a failed model. Mixed income housing works. But the other thing that I did when I was in the legislature was, I called Cook Inlet Housing Authority, and you can build more housing. You can build more housing if you have some full paying tenants. And we had this very sterile requirement that AHFC had. It was like 1950s housing, 1950s design, which is AHFC, the state's main housing authority, would not finance or build housing if you had a business in it. So you couldn't have a coffee shop in an AHFC housing. You couldn't have childcare in AHFC housing. You couldn't have a doctor's office in AHFC housing. You couldn't have a restaurant. It just made the housing boring, and it made it less useful. But so it's better community planning to be able. So we passed a bill. I wrote it. I can tell you how partisan it became. I wrote it, and then there was a Republican majority, and they said we can't have a Democrat pass a bill. So then I had to make a motion on the House floor to take my name off the bill and give it to somebody else. But we got the bill passed, and so mixed use housing is allowed. You can have a restaurant on the first floor. You can have a drugstore on the first floor. You can have a child care on the first floor, but they will pay full rent, and that'll help you build more housing. And so it's good for housing, but it's also better community planning. You want your cities and your communities to be interesting. So that's something that I did. I got that bill passed, but we've got a much bigger crisis right now. And I'm sorry, I wish Governor Dunleavy were here, because I want to know why he hasn't talked about this for 4 years. And I think the reason he hasn't talked about it is he and I have a different view. I don't believe that you can run a state that has problems on the cheap. Like right now we're losing teachers, we're losing police officers, we can't retain them, we can't hire them because we pay so little, and we've let funding lag, and we don't offer a pension benefit, which every other state does. And so what we get is teachers and police who come here for a couple of years, they hunt, they hike, they have their fun, and they go to a place where they get paid better and they get a pension. And that's the same thing with the housing crisis. If you're a governor who believes that you want to run everything on the cheap, you don't come up with solutions because they're going to cost money. And so you duck them. And I'd love to talk to him about that, because I feel like if I become governor, I'm inheriting a problem that he's let fester for 4 years. It's a problem, and nothing at the state level has been done about it.
Okay, which brings us straight to our next question of what do you think the state should do? And in this case, to address the extraordinarily high cost of building housing in rural Alaska. And so specifically, what would you do as governor to address those very high building costs?
I mean, they're high, right? And during COVID, everything is higher. And maybe you can buy materials together so you save on shipping costs. But look, this is something that the governor's not going to do. This is something that the governor is going to have to work so other people can work with each other to do. If there's a state role to help with efficiencies, that would be great. But look, the cost of building supplies are more expensive in rural Alaska. And I'll just say, when the governor tries to decimate the Marine Highway and the Marine Highway is operating less, building supplies become more expensive to transport to coastal communities. So that's for coastal communities. This governor has made building supplies more expensive and groceries more expensive and medical visits more expensive by cutting the Marine Highway the way he has. But there's no magic answer to I think, the price gouging that's going on with some of the shipping companies. We can negotiate with them and try and sit down with them and try and bully pulpit them and say you're overcharging. But I think there's a fair chance that I feel like there's a fair view by the business community that that COVID has allowed some of the shipping companies to overcharge. But if we had the Marine Highway as a competitor, it would be harder for them to overcharge. So no, I mean, you raise a good point. Like, building supplies are more expensive, and at some point you have to convene the best minds to figure out how to lower the cost of things that are too expensive.
Bill.
A number of things you can do to bring down the cost. When we're we have not been to a single community, Heidi and myself, not a single one that has not had a housing issue and a housing crisis. So it is uniform across the state. I'm a big believer that Alaskans are Imagineers and that we can figure it out better than anybody else. And what I don't like is we put something out to bid and we pay somebody in Boise to build boxes and ship the boxes to up here. I've seen them; they don't work. The design is wrong. It does not have a mud room coming in, so you can bring in subsistence and have it something in and it's really not doesn't fit the need in rural Alaska. So I'm a believer of the X Prize. I believe of putting something out there and say, have Alaskans figure it out and bring us some options, some solutions. I think the university has a big role in this. I met with a couple of retired engineers who are UAF graduates. One's a professor there, who've come up with a building concept. They're in Fairbanks. I won't mention their names. They might not have the patent filed yet, but they're filing a patent where they are able to go to a community and they're metal. They can make all the structure and the walls out of metal, and it connects together almost like not a good example, but the IKEA furniture. If you can figure that out, you can put these together. And they have put a lot of time and effort into this, as far as how the envelope is very high. They're working with the Cold Climate Housing Research to make it efficient. So I think we need to think outside the standard box. It's just day and age of 3D printing and things you can do differently. But what I liked about them is they can put on a barge enough raw materials. They can build 30 or 40 houses in a village just off of that barge, as far as the raw materials from that barge. So it's a little different for me, because I'm a wood guy, I'm a carpenter guy. I'm not so much of a metal guy. These guys. So I was listening closely because it was exciting to hear their passion for what what they want to do, and their cost is significantly less because you're bringing in raw materials. You're not bringing in shipping empty boxes. As Les says, our shipping cost in rural Alaska is horrific. The other part I really like about it is that it can be done with local help, local labor. They can help build their own home. I'm a big fan of career and technical education, and after my favorite school is the Military Youth Academy at J-Bear, and it used to be they graduated from that, and two of my nephews went through that program, 22 weeks, up at 4 o'clock in the morning. You run 5 miles. Someone's yelling at you, and the whole time it's pretty amazing what they. But after that, they had a program that they would be in the trades for a week with the 1547 electricians, the 1281 carpenters. They would teach them how to do something. One of those students went back to Nome, looked around at his house with 3 families living there, and said, "We can double the size of this house, and I know how to do it." And they did. So I'm all about local training, so our youth understand the building concept, and some schools do that a lot. So I think that's an opportunity as well.
So train people to build locally, so you don't have to import folks.
Exactly.
And then try for a different type of housing that is perchance cheaper to ship.
It is, and
Okay.
and the other nice thing is that the floor of the one I just described, the metal, it's all insulated with foam.
Hmm.
So if there's a flood,
It
it's
would
going to
float.
float. So there was that.
Can I say something else?
Definitely.
So there's a silver lining. So it's a crisis. It's going to be expensive. It's going to be a massive undertaking to deal with the housing crisis in the state. But the silver lining is that we have places like the Cold Climate Housing Research Center in Fairbanks, and they come up with prototypes that people then can use in their communities. They've done the research on how to build it. They've done the research on how to design it. They've done that expense. And so just like in Juneau now, there's this new subdivision where houses are heated by heat pumps with no global warming gases coming out, and they're very efficient. We can now go in and build housing in communities that some of which have a lot of substandard housing, and build great housing that is energy efficient, housing that is high quality. There's the technology does not yet exist for a heat pump to work at 60 below and heat your house. It works at 10 below, but not at 60 below. But I think the good thing that can come out of this is that you will have housing that people want. Like in Nome, the superintendent told me, even if we build teacher housing, we've got 14 units here next to the school, but teachers don't want to live in it, and it's not integrated with the community. Now we have an opportunity to build good housing across the state that people will want, so it'll be easier to attract teachers. And then the build your own that Bill talked about, like we should do it. We should do it so people are building houses with local labor, so local people have those jobs. That applies to teachers. That applies to police. That applies to renewable energy maintenance. We should be, and that applies to mental health treatment providers, which we need badly in the state. We should be training people in communities so they can live in their communities, especially in the smaller communities. You have teachers from Kansas coming up and teaching kids in Nome, and they don't understand the culture. You should have teachers from Nome teaching kids in Nome. So I just tailing off on Bill's point on creating local projects for local labor so people have jobs. It also applies to other professions.
I do feel like you both, though, keep talking about these new technologies that, have been tested in labs, and you want to try them out in rural Alaska. Like, why should people trust necessarily that that's going to work? Like, how are you going to make sure that people
Thank you for that
trust
question,
you?
because I wanted to finish something about Cold Climate Housing Research. They actually go out and build the houses. They'll go out and build the house with local help. They'll build the first one, and then others will build that. And they built one house at Attatoobik Pass, and in that winter, they took off for a 3-day weekend. The crew did from the housing from the cold climate folks went home for around how many could have been Thanksgiving, and it dropped down. Then the heat went off and dropped. It was like 60 below. When they came back, nothing had frozen. And so it is amazing. They said it probably wouldn't have passed some architectural subdivision standards of some sort, but it was an incredibly efficient home. So they actually go out and do the hands-on part of it, because it's not theory for them. They don't sort of sit in a lab with white coats on and say, we think this will work. They actually go out and build the house. I mean, Jack Haber was the sort of the founder of that. Bruno is now the executive director of that, and it's a very exciting piece of the solution, because everybody that's trying to figure out the different, and I listen when people kind of come to me and say they got a new idea, but I listen to see if they bring up cold climate housing. If they do, that sort of is a significant check on my evaluation of what they're doing, because they understand that if heat efficiency is a huge part of it. It's just not the envelope itself. It's if you're paying 25% of the cost of energy versus otherwise, that goes a long ways to make it affordable.
It's a fair question. So, I mean, will the ideas work? Not yet. Not all of them, right? Like the heat pump technology that they're doing at Cold Climate Housing, which works in Juneau, is not yet ready to work in Nome, because we always hope technology is improving, but they don't know how to heat a house at 60 below with a heat pump. You can only do so much at this point. So, yeah.
But the biggest example of the heat pump is the Sea Life Center. It's amazing that they did it all with local help. The guy with the local plumbing company kind of figured this out, that they bring in the water in from the ocean, and And now they're extending that from the Sea Life Center up into the community of Seward and whatnot. So it's really gaining momentum.
So it sounds like from both of you, there's a lot of new and interesting and cool technology that's out there. There's things that'll make things more cost efficient and heat efficient. But how do you pay for all of this? I feel like new technology, especially, always ends up being really expensive. So that kind of moves us straight into the next issue: is if either of you wins the governorship, part of your role is to propose a budget to the legislature. So what would you include in that budget to address the housing shortage or other aspects of keeping people housed? And Bill, would you like to go first?
Well, I wouldn't just pick a number. It would have to be based upon, what a housing coalition had brought to us, what the result of the work that was done. I think you've got to put some work in first before you can justify exactly what the number is. The worst thing you do is significantly underfund something, or have it so high that you don't get anything. So you have to be able to justify whatever numbers. That takes some groundwork to do that. The good thing is that a lot of the technology and research is already done. They don't have to go in and we just need to bring together, and work collaboratively on that. So I think you have to have, specific projects that the communities have in mind, and all communities want to solve this problem. I didn't see a single one that said we don't want to solve our housing problem. They're all limited on what they can do as a community, not just growing. They just want to get back to where they were because of not having, we're 1,100 teachers short in Alaska. We're not having education job fair for the first time in over 35 years in Alaska because no one's going to come here, partly because of the worst retirement system in the world, or in the United States, and secondly is the housing situation. So there would have to be funding, but the exact number has to be sort of justified through a plan. What's the plan? And Les talked about mixed use, and I absolutely agree with him. In the mix, what happens though, sometimes the state will do something, but the local government has local restrictions in their zoning laws that you have to have commercial here. It's Zone C, and residential is RA, or however it is set up. And now municipalities are having that mixed use, where you can have commercial property on the ground floor, you can have apartments on the second floor, and it works out well. And so there's some coordination with local government as well to work collaboratively. And again, we never found anybody that said we don't want any more affordable housing.
Okay.
So silver lining is I think we can get better, higher quality, more energy efficient housing across the state. The downside is we got a housing crisis. We got an affordable housing crisis. People cannot afford a house, and in a lot of communities, especially in Southeast, in Seward, in Seward on the Kenai, in Ketchikan, they're talking about new houses at $500,000-$600,000, and that people can't afford. And so we are going to have to find a way to make houses affordable. This is a national issue. There was an article in the Daily News just the other day that nationally, with land prices going so high, people are having a hard time building starter homes. Nobody's building starter homes anymore. You add that to the Alaska problem, especially in communities in Southeast with very little land, it's a problem, and it's not going to be easy to solve. I mean, and I'm sorry, that's why I wish the governor were here to talk about what he's done for the last 4 years, because it's just gotten worse, and I don't think anything's been done. So this is going to be sort of a brand new way to solve a problem that hasn't been addressed. There are things you can do, but they're not free. The state has a program. What I learned going around the state is one of the most expensive things about building a new subdivision is building the utilities into that subdivision. That's a phenomenal amount of expense. The state has had a program that's been unfunded for a decade, where the state helps at times under the right circumstances. If you're going to save consumers money, they help the cost of building the utilities into the new subdivision. That goes in the capital budget. That's a program within the Department of Environmental Conservation. It hasn't been funded in 10 years. And I think that's really the big point on this campaign.
So would you fund that?
You can't run a state with no money. Like, you can't run schools with no money. You can't solve this homelessness problem with no money. You can't run a university with no money, and you can't. And that's why this program's not been funded for 10 years. So I think, I mean, I've got to say, you've got to have money in the state again.
But would that be a funding priority if you did have money? Like
it
helping
would-
communities put in utilities?
Yeah, if the savings would be passed off to consumers, right? That's you'd have to make sure the savings are passed off to consumers. If it's a community housing entity that's doing it, they'll probably pass the savings off to consumers. You wouldn't want to send it to somebody who's just going to keep the money, right? So,
Okay.
A recent study just came out showing the best and worst infrastructure of states, and Alaska came in dead last. We were ranked as F as our infrastructure. Now that normally sounds bad, and it is bad, but with the bipartisan infrastructure money, if you're going to, and it's based upon need, it's going to be competitive grants for communities, for states, and so it's based upon how much. I mean, if Exhibit A is that analysis as far as based upon need, and in the article, it talked about the bipartisan infrastructure money. I would certainly start on the federal level aggressively on that to not require an act of Congress, just use what's available, and I would aggressively compete for that money. I don't want to see Alaska get 1/50th of that pool of money. The pool of money is between 100 and 300 billion dollars. It's large, and to use that for costs of subdivisions and that's a huge part of the cost of a home is you're paying your share of that subdivision and whatnot. So I really think there's some opportunities on the federal side that we need to engage and meet with them and work with them. And yes, we don't agree with them on many things in Alaska, but that doesn't mean we turn a blind eye to the opportunities, because I look at federal money as our money.
Okay.
We pay our taxes. And someone's get the benefit of our tax money. It might as well be us. And so for years with Senator Stevens, we actually received back more than we paid. It's the opposite now. Now we are receiving back less than what we pay in taxes. We need to be aggressive on that.
So we've talked a lot about building housing and making housing available to people. I want to kind of shift the conversation slightly, because it takes more than just available units to keep people stably housed. So what do you see as other key tools for keeping people in stable housing? And what do you propose to do as governor to create that stability?
are you talking about the homelessness problem, or?
I'm talking about keeping people in housing. I mean, yeah, it would prevent people from becoming homeless.
Oh, I mean, the big problem is to try and build affordable housing. Once you build affordable housing, people will be able to stay in it. We're not at the point where we have a solution to building affordable housing. Nationally, we're not. In the state, we're not. Affordable housing is not what they worry about in Seward and Ketchikan, which is that a new house costs $600,000. And we can say there's a magic solution. We've tossed out ideas that people have to start working on this, because they haven't started working on it over the last 4 years. It's an issue that's been buried under the rug, and so communities are having to deal with it, and people who can't find a house, who can't afford a house, have to deal with it. And we can't get teachers here for 3 reasons. We don't pay them enough. We don't offer them a pension like they can get in every other state, and they can't afford the housing in the community that we're trying to underpay them in. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is what happens when you underfund a state. This is what happens when you run a state on the cheap. I'm sorry, that's why I'm running, because you can't run a state on the cheap and create opportunity and dignity for people in a state where people want to live but can't afford to live.
Okay, so, all right.
You have to give them a reason to stay here. Our biggest export right now is our young people. 34% of folks between, I think it's 18 and 26 are leaving Alaska, going elsewhere. We need to not only keep that our young people here, but also bring back those that we need to give them a reason to come back. Our economy is ranked 49th out of 50th. We're ahead only of Mississippi in our economy in the post-COVID recovery, and they know that. They see that. These are smart folks that look. They don't really see a future in our state, because there's no vision, there's no plan, there's no vision. We look at all the beauty of our state, and that only goes so far. As far as if they don't see opportunities for them, so to keep them in their homes, let's make sure that they have a reason that they want to stay in the state. And a lot of young people are leaving the state.
What about things like social supports for keeping people in their housing? So supports so they can supplement their income with other types of assistance, or mental health supports, or childcare, all of the other things. I mean, you can have a house, but if you
Well, childcare is obviously the most critical of ones we've heard. The two things we've heard is childcare and affordable housing. Not always in that order, but those two are always together. If you don't have childcare, Heidi Dwigis talks about the experience they had with their 4.5, 4.75-year-old daughter, Olive, that trying to get childcare in Juneau. They're on multiple waiting lists for a long, long time to be able to get childcare. If you can't get childcare, that changes your whole trajectory of where you're going to live and sort of where you're gonna how you can make it your home. So and I think the state has a role there as far as on the child care side, and we have a lot of vacant buildings. We have a lot of vacant floors in buildings that certainly could be utilized in a child care facility. You have to pay people. The most precious commodity we have is our young ones, and you need to make sure that those that are caring for them, are properly compensated. So there's a concept, you kick the can down the road long enough, the can will kick back. And I think that's what we're seeing is the can kicking back now, saying, no, I think we're going to find someplace else to live. So it's a challenge. But you're right. There are other, we need to invest in ourselves. We need more reasons to, Governor Hickenlooper in Colorado became a good friend of mine when I was governor, and they put together the Department of Outdoor Recreation, which we have looked at and we've talked about that as far as all that does as far as opening up access to, not necessarily with roads and highways, but with trails and remote cabins and those kinds of things. There's much more we can do in that area to give people a reason to remain in Alaska.
I'm going to help you move towards the organization's main focus on homelessness. But there are three major things that have been swept under the rug by this governor. He hasn't addressed the housing crisis. He hasn't addressed the homelessness crisis. He hasn't addressed the mental health crisis. We don't have mental health practitioners in the state. If you have a child with a major mental health problem, we don't have the practitioners to treat them. It's a big problem. These are easy issues to ignore and you just ignore them and they just get worse, but that's what's happened. So look, you don't solve these problems by cutting mental health treatment funds, which this governor has done. You don't solve the homelessness problem by cutting $4 million out of the budget on homelessness funding. You don't solve the mental health problem by cutting 30% of the behavioral health grant funds in the state. So look, there's the issue of housing for people who are physically fine, mentally fine, and they just can't afford a house. We've been talking about that. The bigger problem, the more heart-wrenching problem, is the problem for people who are battling mental health problems that are not getting the services they need so they can stabilize their lives, so they can live in stable housing. I know you wanted to talk about that, but it's sort of a trifecta. Cutting mental health funding when we don't have enough. Cutting homelessness funding when we don't have enough, and ignoring the housing crisis. So these are things that we're going to inherit as additional problems we have to deal with in the state, but we have to deal with them, and they're going to cost money. And it's time to. I know this isn't your focus, but to do all of these things, you're going to need money, and I think giving away $1.2 billion in oil company tax subsidies to the wealthiest corporations in the world so that we don't have any money to address these problems is insanity. I don't believe in running a state on the cheap. You can't solve these problems for free, and that's why this governor hasn't addressed them.
All right. You did say that we should transition a bit into the next topic.
That's not my call.
What?
That's not my call, but I figured you would be essentially.
Homelessness is a giant issue in the state, and not just in urban areas, in rural areas as well. It looks like a lot of different things around the state, from people living in campsites to people grouped into homes, overcrowded homes. Before we go straight into talking a lot about homelessness, I want to talk about equity issues. Alaska Native people are disproportionately experiencing homelessness beyond other groups within the state. And it takes longer for agencies to place them into housing when it does become available. So, if you were governor, what would you do to decrease the inequity within this system? Phil?
You're absolutely right. And there's many villages where in the winter, multiple families will move into one living unit to save the cost of energy, and that's, I have a hard time with that for a couple of reasons, for many reasons. One is, we're the most energy-rich state in the nation, and we have the highest cost energy in the nation, and we have the coldest weather days. So there's something really wrong with that. So we have a plan to bring down the cost of energy. I believe that our goal is to have $2 energy, $2 per gallon of heating fuel as well as motor fuel across the state. And part of the reason we have the high cost of energy is because we sell a portion of our royalty oil to the 3 refineries in Alaska at a very high price, the highest price we can get, indexed to the world price of oil. So when it goes up to $147 a barrel, it's beyond reach. The legislature this year did an energy rebate for which I appreciated them doing that. So it's a matter of addressing it on making, we talk a lot about, and rightfully so, digital equality. I want energy equality. And when I was in Norway, I met with the Secretary of Energy, and I asked him, I said, what's the high and the low in your energy costs in your country, from your highest in the most urban area to the rural? He said, well, that's easy. He said, there's no change. It's all the same price. We have a postage stamp rate of energy. I said, oh, interesting, I like that. Tell me more about it. He said, well, the reason we have that is the areas that have low-cost energy, they do well and they grow. And those with the higher cost energy, they struggle. Our biggest unemployment, some villages have unemployment of 85%. No place in the United States has that, no place. So it's hard to have any sort of a business or an industry when your cost of energy, power cost equalization is wonderful, but it doesn't apply to anything commercial. It applies to residential. So if you have any sort of a commercial store, you're paying significantly higher than any place else in the country for that, and that carries over to the cost of the merchandise. And a gallon of milk will cost $12 or $15. So it's for me, it all comes back to energy. I mean, in many respects, because you bring down that cost of energy, now you can start sort of leveling the playing field as far as being able to stay in some of the communities and some of the villages. We made a decision long ago, and it's a wise decision. I fully support it, that we're going to maintain our rural communities. Interesting, almost all of our resources that brings revenue to the state, almost all of them come from rural Alaska. And then we sort of turn a blind eye, that some have said, well, I'm not sure we can afford rural Alaska. I'm not sure rural Alaska can afford urban Alaska, because the resources are coming from their land.
Yeah, equity for people who are poor, and Alaska's our Alaska Native community bears a lot of the brunt of poverty. It's one of the reasons I'm running. Look, I grew up in foster care. My father was killed when I was 6. I had a good life, so don't worry about me. I worked my way through grade school, high school, college, law school. I went to law school with Michelle Obama, who I think if she ever met me, she would have liked me. But we never met. But the reason I'm running is I don't think this is a state that is equitable towards those who are born with little, or those who are born with problems, or those who are born to difficult families and not wonderful families. And I want to make sure this is a state that provides opportunity and the chance to succeed, and what we call liberty and justice for all, to everybody. And it's sort of my own experience of learning that not everybody is born with an equal chance, that makes me want to make sure that everybody has an equal chance. So when the brunt of poverty is borne by a particular group, it makes me passionate about trying to solve that problem. And life is more expensive in rural Alaska. Services are less available in rural Alaska. I think we have to treat rural Alaskans as equals in the state, and they haven't been treated as equals in the state.
Okay, so you acknowledge that there's inequity, and you acknowledge that there's problems with lake inequity in terms of energy prices. We didn't really address why it takes longer for people who are Alaska Native and who are experiencing homelessness. Why does it take longer for folks to get into housing? Would you do anything to directly address some of these inequities versus just acknowledge them?
I would do what we did with on the compacting we did between the Department of Health and Social Services and the tribes on child services.
Okay.
I would do that with. I would certainly do. We're looking at exploring doing that on education, public safety, and certainly on housing as well. The tribal, what they've done in tribal health, the incredible successes they've had in tribal health. If they had that same, why not look at the same kind of compacting on housing and let them be tap into their wisdom, tap into their passion, tap into their experience of what works in their region, and empower them. And so I think that I was absolutely, over the moon excited about the official tribal recognition, even though the courts had recognized it for a long time before there was official action in the legislature. I was very pleased about that. So I think the answer is working collaboratively with the tribes on all those issues and find common ground and not be afraid of empowering them to make decisions, and we should be part of helping fund their efforts. But again, they have tremendous financial opportunities on a federal level. Of the 500 tribes in the United States, 229 of them are in Alaska. So we should be having I think we get a disproportionate amount of revenue because sometimes there's a role for the state to participate as well as far as going after that tribal money. And I think we need to be better. We need to be better partners with them on that.
Les?
So, I think you were asking about whether Alaska Native people are being treated fairly in terms of homelessness, and obviously there are Alaska Native people who live in Nome where there's homelessness, and there's Alaska Native people in Anchorage who live with homelessness. I'm a believer that government should look like the people it represents. That our police forces should look like the people they represent. They'd engender more trust. That our teachers should look like the people they represent. That's why I'd rather have teachers who grew up in Nome teaching in Nome than somebody from Kansas teaching in Nome. And I think to the extent possible, the navigators that we have in the homelessness response system, I would hope that we have people in the navigation system who come from similar cultures to the people they're working with. So they understand that this person just ended up in Anchorage from a village, and maybe somebody understands the culture of this person. Maybe somebody knows some of the people from that village who can help. I think that's important. I think I'm proud that we're the only diverse ticket in this race. Not as a criticism towards anybody else, but that was important to me. I wanted to find the most qualified person, but I also wanted. I'm glad that Jessica, Jessica is a Black American. She grew up in Palmer, and I think your government should look like the people you represent, and I want our cabinet to look like that. But I think navigators, the money is not great for navigators. I know it's not easy. The homelessness response system is underfunded as much as the Rasmussen Foundation and Widener and Associates. Those folks have put in money generously to help, but I would like to see navigators that are from the cultures of the people who they are helping. I think it's in almost every aspect of society, whether it's teaching or homelessness, that helps.
For one final question, while we are talking about homelessness, and you have both acknowledged that this isn't just an issue in Anchorage, it's a statewide issue. We've talked a little bit about overcrowding. What do you see as the governor's role in directly addressing homelessness? And I'm asking that also in terms of thinking about the governor's role in appointing the heads of state agencies. What would you, as the head of the executive branch, do to guide the actions different agencies should take? And I'll point this last question first to you.
Yeah. Well, look, homelessness is a major problem in Alaska. 1,000 homeless people in Alaska, 100 of them in Anchorage, 1,000 in Anchorage, 1,000 in other parts of Alaska. So roughly 2,000 homeless people in the state. In Anchorage, 100 of them are families with kids. And we don't have a solution yet. We know the things that work. We know that rapid rehousing works. Like sending a homeless person and a homeless family to live in a shelter is not a solution. Sending them to live in a campground is not a solution. Getting them housing is a solution. Real housing is a solution. And I know the people who are working with your group know that rapid rehousing is part of the solution. Sometimes you need supportive housing for people who have mental health and other problems that they're dealing with. But look, let's not look at it through rose-colored glasses. We don't have the mental health professionals in the state, and the behavioral health professionals in the state, and the substance abuse professionals in the state that we need to provide the wraparound services that somebody needs as they're transitioning into a home. There's a shortage.
How would you address that?
There are a few things you can do. I mean, number one, we have to build a mental health workforce again. I think we have to there's a program called SHARP that helped repaid people's loans if they went into the professions where we had shortages. We have a shortage of mental health counselors for children, and that's awful. We're still sending 100 children a year out of state for treatment when we shouldn't be doing that. We have a shortage of substance abuse and mental health treatment counselors for everybody. We've got to train our own here, and so that problem's not going to be solved next week, and it hasn't been solved the last 4 years. There's been no proposals the last 4 years to solve it. I think we need something like the SHARP program, which is not exactly SHARP, but we will help you repay your loans if you get the degrees and the certificates you need. Where we have a shortage, it's mental health treatment, it's children's mental health treatment. Frankly, we should be doing this for teachers, to train teachers to serve in their local communities too. There's going to be a cost to it. That's why I say you can't run the state for free. Right now, the state is being run in a way where we're fighting each other, whether you get a dividend or schools or mental health treatment or a marine highway or construction projects, but this government won't let you have all of them. You need all of them, and so that's why I talk about bringing revenue into the state again by ending these oil company tax subsidies so we can afford to do this. But the mental health part of it, it's going to take a few years to build up the mental health workforce again, and I think we need to do it here. Health centers around the state are helping to do that. They're helping to pay for tuition. They're helping to pay for certificates. But we've got to grow the mental health treatment workforce. For those homeless people who are fine and they just need help getting into housing, those are the easiest. But for those who also need mental health services or job training or alcoholism and substance abuse treatment, which we provide inadequately in the state, we've got to build up that workforce.
All right, thank you.
So I'll be brief. The role of the governor is to lead, and the governor needs it. And one of the things that I did to, I came from largely from Valdez, and we did not have a homeless situation in Valdez like we have in other parts of the state. So what I did is I went to the Glory Hall in Juneau and invited those that would have lunch at the Glory Hall, and invited them to the governor's house or the people's house to have lunch, and we did. We had tablecloths, the same thing as anybody else would do. And so they came there for lunch rather than to the Glory Hall one day. And I had a chance to sit down with them personally at one table with the other and talk to them about thereir, there's a term called feed the line but shorten the line. And so I believe in that. So I wanted to find out firsthand those in that situation don't have lobbyists that come in and lobby the legislature for funding or lobby the governor for funding. They don't. So I want to hear firsthand from them what their story was, not to pry or not to make anybody uncomfortable, but I really want to know firsthand. And from that, what I learned there, that's when we put together, the task force, the housing summit, and Elizabeth Schultz was her position, was to have that. So I think that to make it a priority, you have to have, we used to have special assistants in the governor's office many years ago, and that was let go many years ago. And I think there needs to be a special assistant specifically on the homeless situation. It's because I do think that the state has a role and to lead with it. So I think that's the role of the governor, is to provide the leadership. The governor doesn't have a checkbook. The legislature has a checkbook, but the governor can do a lot towards creating the awareness of the situation. So I think that that hasn't been in the past, and I think that I would reinstitute some of the things we did while I was governor.
All right, thank you. Thank you both very much. And just for kind of a quick clarification, according to numbers in the Alaska Homeless Management Information System, there's actually 8,700 people in Anchorage who accessed homelessness services in this past year, less than a year, and 4,700 in the rest of the state. So
Wow.
it's a larger
It is
larger issue than we think.
very large.
I want to thank you both very, very much for being here. This is all the time that we have today. Thank you all to the crew at the Tudor Road Studio as well. Also, many thanks to the community members who provided inspiration for the questions, and of course, to everyone who's watching. You can find a recording of this discussion on the Alaska Coalition on Housing and Homelessness Facebook page, and also on the Alaska Coalition to End Homelessness's Facebook page and YouTube page. Share it with everyone you know. Let folks think and talk more about homelessness, and have a great night.